This meeting is being recorded.
This meeting is being recorded. Yes, I actually am doing something a little bit different with this than I've done in the past that I hope will help make it less confusing, okay? So I really need an actual recording of this class, not go back and resurrect some old recording, okay? Let's see. Okay, so we're going to write a book review. And who's ever been assigned a book report in a class before? Has anybody ever had to do that? Okay. You know, there are all kinds of book reports. Some of them are really goofy. You know, it's just like, seriously, we take the time to do that. Just cutesy stuff, okay? But we're not going to do that. We're going to write a serious paper about a story we're about to read together. We will work on the body of the paragraph these 2 weeks, the body of the paper. Then when we come back in 2 weeks, we are going to learn to write the intro and conclusion for a paper like this. And then the next class after that will be your chosen book review, okay? Has everybody finished reading their book yet already? Okay. You need to go ahead and get that finished up if you haven't. Okay, what's really fun about this is once you do write that one that you've picked the book for, you can actually go to Amazon and post that on Amazon. So, you know, you go find your book somewhere on Amazon and then you can post a review. Of course, we tell all the important parts in these reviews. So what do you think you'd have to put at the top of it?
No.
What is it when you don't want to find out how a book ends? What do you put at the top? Spoiler alert, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going to tell all the main things, what the conflict is, how the conflict gets solved, you know, all of that. But it's really fun because you can actually review books and post your review on Amazon. And this review is a lot better than what you'll usually find on Amazon for a book review. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a fun thing you can do and actually be published online somewhere. Okay? So let's look at this together. When I first saw this, I thought, wow, this is an amazing way to write a book review. Look with me on page 43. We're first going to talk about conventions of literary analysis, okay? When I say conventions, thank you, Trey. When I say conventions, I mean this is the way people do this kind of writing. So all different kinds of writing have their own conventions. If you've ever had to do a serious lab report for a science class, I don't know if anybody in here has had to do that before. But we did a class, my son actually did, and of course I had to oversee him. It was a chemistry class, and man, that lab report was a bear, I'll tell you. They have their own conventions, okay? History papers have conventions. Formal writing, like we've been doing back in the fall, those have conventions. And so literary analysis is a form of formal writing that also has some extra special rules that go along with it. So let's look at these really quick. The first thing is that literary analysis, literature papers always include literature vocabulary. We wouldn't do that if we were telling a story because it would be really weird, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a few minutes if we have time. But when we talk about literature in a paper, we do use literature vocabulary like character, conflict, and denouement. So we have a list of these words on page 47. We'll look at them together soon. Another really strange thing about literature papers is that when you're talking about the story structure, and you know what I mean now when I do this, okay, the plot and the different elements of literature, when you're talking about them in a literature paper, you always use present tense, okay? So you don't say, Frodo was a hobbit who lived in the Shire. He went to Mordor to destroy the One Ring of Power. You would say Frodo is a hobbit from the Shire. He goes to Mordor to destroy the One Ring of Power. Okay? You talk about a story in present tense like it's happening right then. Now, this is harder than it seems. Who's had to do this before in a literature paper? You have? Did you find it hard to stay in present tense? Yeah, you just keep slipping into past tense because that's usually how we tell a story, right? Okay.
Yes.
But in present tense, in a literature paper, you always talk about the story structure in present tense. Okay, but when you're talking about the author, which you will do in your introduction, it would be really weird to say J.R.R. Tolkien is a British English professor who is in charge of the Department of Ancient Literature at Oxford. What would be wrong with that? Anybody know about Tolkien?
No.
Anybody know Tolkien? He wrote Lord of the Rings. He's dead. So if you talk about the author, unless it's current, unless he's really still alive, then you would, of course, have to use past tense, right? Otherwise, people would be like, "Ooh, cool, I want to go to Oxford and see him." You can't. He's dead. Okay. Now, another thing is when we're talking about authors' names, and this is really true for all formal writing, but we're particularly talking about literature here. When you make the first reference to the author, you use their full name first and last. You don't use a title like Dr., Mr., Mrs., whatever, Senator. You don't use the title, just the first and last name. Every time after that, when you mention the author's name, you can only use the last name. Okay? So we're going to write a story, a review of a book by Jack London, and we will say Jack London the first time, but every time after that, if we use his name, what will we say?
London.
Exactly. We only call him London after that. Now, I don't know, some of you guys, I found this weird as a mother, and I didn't really realize it, but somehow guys a lot of times call each other by their last names. Is there anybody who routinely gets called by your last name? I find that so strange. Women, they don't do that, okay? I never get called Kimbrel, but guys always do. I don't know if that dribbled over from the military or what. So,
Well, I mean, like in sports, they call women, like women athletes, by their last name. So
maybe. I guess I'm not really into sports. But when my guys got called Kimbrel or even Kim, I thought that was really strange. Okay. So y'all are sort of used to this concept of just using a last name, but girls not so much, unless they play a lot of sports, Trey, right? Okay, titles. There are certain ways to punctuate titles when you talk about literature. And fortunately, I have a comprehensive list for you on page 45 if you just flip over. And so this is the basic rule about how you go about designating a title. If it's a short work, you put it in quotation marks. If it's a long work, you put it in italics. Now that sounds a little hazy, right? So that's the basic rule. Sometimes it's hard to decide, but a novel's definitely in italics and a short story is definitely in quotation marks. Yes, Cooper.
Are we still reading from page 43 or from page 45?
Just flip over one page to page 45 and you can see my list.
All right.
Now, the only one that doesn't have two different choices is the very last one, air or marine vessels. Oh, and art. All art is titled by italics, and all air and marine vessels are titled by italics. So we're going to talk about a ship in our book review that we're going to start today, and it's the Annie Mine, and you can see it there in italics, okay? We're also going to be talking about a short story, and if you look up to the very top where it says fiction, title of a short story in Yeddo Bay, that's the actual short story we're going to be doing. But when you do your novel, you'll put it in italics, okay? All right, so titling is really important in literature papers. That's gotten kind of hazy now for people because sometimes when you're writing about stuff like on Amazon, if you write the title of a book, there are no italics available. So people have gotten more and more confused about this as time has gone on. Now, plot. When you talk about the plot of a story in a literature paper, let's read this together. Number 5, back on page 43. Everybody look carefully with me because this is very important. I've encouraged you to make things up in these last 2 papers, right? Change the character, change the setting, change this and change that. The guy can die or he cannot die, just as you please, okay? But when you write about a book or a story, you have to talk exactly about what is in the story. You can't veer off. You cannot make things up. Does everybody understand that?
Yes.
Any teachers or instructors or professors that assign a book, you can count on the fact that they didn't just read the cliff notes. They know it inside out, and they've probably read it a gazillion times. Okay?
Okay.
So you have to make sure that you get these things correct. Don't ever try to write about a literature paper using cliff notes or something you got off the internet or by watching the movie. That is a recipe for disaster. Read the book. Okay?
Okay.
Read it 2 or 3 more times if you have to. All right? Don't change anything in the story. If you do, that's going to result in an automatic 0. No questions asked. Okay?
Okay.
Quotes. Quotes should be introduced with the speaker's name at the beginning of the quote, followed by a comma and quotation marks with the quote. For example, London declared, "I have never written a line that I'd be ashamed for my young daughters to read, and I never shall write such a line." Direct quotes from a story must be quoted exactly as they appear in the story. Don't ever rely on your memory for putting a quote in a paper. Look it up, okay? If you paraphrase something, don't put quotation marks. Most of what we write are paraphrases, right? So you wouldn't put a quotation mark around something that you were saying in your own words. When you put those quotation marks, that means this is exactly what was said. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, if a quote is longer than 4 lines, then you offset it. You can look down there where it says, Jack London's daughter, Charmaine London, wrote about her father, and here's a quote. You bring it in from the rest of the paragraph by 1/2 inch, and you don't put quotation marks on it. But we won't really be doing that in this paper. So mostly your quotes are going to be short. Personal references. Of course, now I told you in this last paper that you could talk about yourself, and I know John Shaw did. Did anybody else tell about something that happened to them in their paper? Nobody else? But in this particular paper, this is formal writing. You cannot talk about yourself at all. You never use I, me, my. In my opinion, this was an extremely boring story. Okay? If you want to say something was boring, how would you say it?
This was an extremely boring story.
Yes, exactly. You don't talk about your opinion. You don't talk about yourself. You don't say our protagonist, which I don't know why people want to do that, except they've read a lot of bad writing. It's not our protagonist. What is it?
Your.
The.
Or the.
The protagonist.
Oh, you didn't hear
Okay.
anything.
We find the protagonist walking down the street in Yokohama, Japan. No, we don't. Okay? The protagonist is walking down the street in Yokohama, Japan. We don't talk about ourselves. We're not there. Okay.
Okay.
Personal. Okay. That's personal references. We also don't say things like in this paper, in this paragraph, in this essay. Okay. We don't talk about our writing. Using numbers, spell out any number that only takes 1 or 2 words, except for dates, addresses, times of day, or instances where numbers are used for technical measurement, like Flight 800. And abbreviations, generally abbreviations are avoided in formal writing, with the exceptions of the titles before and after proper names, except we won't be doing that in here. Names of familiar organizations like the NAACP or the FBI, or conventions noting times or dates like BC or AM. Not, however, for months. That is, if you were writing about a month, we'll have a month in our review, and it'll happen in July. We wouldn't put JUL. It's July. Spell it out. Okay. So those are the rules. And now what we want to do is look at how we actually put one of these together. And what I want to do first is let's read the story. I'm going to read it out loud, and you can follow along with me in the book. And then we're going to talk about the parts, okay? And then we'll figure out how it is we're going to go about writing this paper. We need to talk about the literature vocabulary, and we need to make out a keyword outline, which I'm going to do with you so that you can make sure that you get all the parts in the right places, okay?
Okay.
All right, so the story that we're going to be reading together and writing about for this paper is on page 168. Has anybody read a Jack London book before, like Call of the Wild or White Fang? Those are 2 popular books that Jack London wrote. I have a little biography about Jack London in here, and he actually did go to sea, like the character in this story does, when he was, I think, 15 or so. He actually went on a sailing schooner and went all the way over to Japan and in that area. And then he came back. He was an oyster pirate before that. He had his own boat. He lived in San Francisco Bay, 168. He lived in San Francisco and was an oyster pirate in San Francisco Bay. And that doesn't mean that he boarded other people's boats and took their oysters. It means that he went out in his own little boat and gathered oysters and sold them. So he was very handy from an early age. And you really had to be back then if you didn't come from a family that had wealth, because you really probably couldn't go to school for very long. And then you had to start earning your own way in the world. So a lot of young American fellows went to sea if they didn't have a family that was going to send them to college or something like that. And so Jack London did. And so a lot of his early stories, I would call all of his stories really adventure stories. Later on, he became a very committed evolutionist when he was in his adult years. But back when he wrote these stories, he was just an adventurous fella, and a lot of what happened to him he put into his stories. Okay, so they're not autobiographical, but they do reflect the kind of life that he lived, which makes them like a time capsule. Very interesting. And this was probably around the beginning of the 1900s. Okay, so let's read this together, and then we're going to talk about the story structure. Okay.
Okay.
We're all doing this one story for the first book review we do, because book reviews are complicated, and it's helpful for us all to do this together. And this is a very short one, but then you can take this same model and you can do it with any book. You can also do it with a movie. It's a great way for writing a movie review. Okay. All right. In Yeddo Bay by Jack London. Somewhere along Theater Street, he had lost it. He remembered being hustled somewhat roughly on the bridge over one of the canals that crossed that busy thoroughfare. Possibly some light-fingered pickpocket was even then enjoying the 50-odd yen his purse had contained. And then again, he thought he might have lost it himself, just lost it carelessly. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say before we go on. He's very fond of one of our dress ups. He uses it repeatedly. So I want you to kind of be aware as we're reading and see if you can figure out which one I'm talking about. Hopelessly, and for the 20th time, he searched in all his pockets for the missing purse. It was not there. His hand lingered in his empty hip pocket, and he woefully regarded the voluble and vociferous restaurant keeper, who insanely clamored, 25 sen, you pay now, 25 sen. But my purse, the boy said, I tell you, I've lost it somewhere. Whereupon the restaurant keeper lifted his arms indignantly and shrieked, 25 sen, 25 sen, you pay now. Quite a crowd had collected, and it was growing embarrassing for Alf Davis. It was so ridiculous and petty, Alf thought, such a disturbance about nothing. And decidedly, he must be doing something. Thoughts of diving wildly through that forest of legs and of striking out at whomsoever opposed him flashed through his mind. But as though divining his purpose, one of the waiters, a short and chunky chap with an evil-looking cast in one eye, seized him by the arm. You pay now, 25 sen, yelled the proprietor, hoarse with rage. Alf was red in the face too, from mortification, but he resolutely set out on another exploration. He had given up the purse, pinning his last hope on stray coins. In the little change pocket of his coat, he found a 10-sen piece and a 5 copper sen. And remembering having recently missed a 10-sen piece, he cut the seam of the pocket and resurrected the coin from the depths of the lining. 25 sen he held in his hand, the sum required to pay for the supper he had eaten. He turned them over to the proprietor, who counted them, grew suddenly calm, and bowed obsequiously. In fact, the whole crowd bowed obsequiously and melted away. Alf Davis was a young sailor, just turned 16, on board the Annie Mine, an American sailing schooner, which had run into Yokohama to ship its season's catch of skins to London. And in this, his second trip ashore, he was beginning to snatch his first puzzling glimpses of the Japanese mind. He laughed when the bowing and kowtowing was over and turned on his heel to confront another problem. How was he to get aboard ship? It was 11 o'clock at night, and there would be no ship's boats ashore, while the outlook for hiring a native boatman with nothing but empty pockets to draw upon was not particularly inviting. Keeping a sharp lookout for shipmates, he went down to the pier. At Yokohama, there are no long lines of wharves. The shipping lies out at anchor, enabling a few hundred of the short-legged people to make a livelihood by carrying passengers to and from the shore. A dozen sampan men and boys hailed Alf and offered their services. He selected the most favorable looking one, an old and beneficent appearing man with a withered leg. Alf stepped into the sampan and sat down. It was quite dark and he could not see what the old fellow was doing, although he was evidently doing nothing about shoving off and getting underway. At last, he limped over and peered into Alf's face. 10 sen, he said. Yes, I know, 10 sen, Alf answered carelessly, but hurry up. American schooner. 10 sen, you pay now, the old fellow insisted. Alf felt himself grow hot all over at the hateful words, pay now. You take me to American schooner, then I pay, he said. But the man stood up patiently before him, held out his hand and said, 10 sen, you pay now. Alf tried to explain. He had no money. He had lost his purse, but he would pay. As soon as he got aboard the American schooner, then he would pay. No, he would not even go aboard the American schooner. He would call to his shipmates and they would give the sampan man the 10 sen first. After that, he would go aboard. So it was all right, of course. To all of which the beneficent appearing old man replied, you pay now, 10 sen. And to make matters worse, the other sampan men squatted on the pier steps, listening. Alf, chagrined and angry, stood up to step ashore, but the old fellow laid a detaining hand on his sleeve. You'll give shirt now. I take you American schooner, he proposed. Then it was that all of Alf's American independence flamed up in his breast. The American has a born dislike of being imposed upon, and to Alf this was sheer robbery. 10 sen was equivalent to 6 American cents, while his shirt, which was of good quality and was new, had cost him $2. He turned his back on the man without a word and went out to the end of the pier, the crowd laughing with great gusto, following at his heels. The majority of them were heavy-set, muscular fellows, and the July night being one of sweltering heat, they were clad in the least possible raiment. The water people of any race are rough and turbulent, and it struck Alf that to be out at midnight on a pier end with such a crowd of wharfmen in a big Japanese city was not as safe as it might be. One burly fellow with a shock of black hair and ferocious eyes came up. The rest shoved in after him to take part in the discussion. "Give me shoes," the man said. "Give me shoes now. I take you American schooner." Alf shook his head, whereat the crowd clamored that he accept the proposal. Now, the American is so constituted that to browbeat or bully him is the last way under the sun of getting him to do any certain thing. He will dare willingly, but he will not permit himself to be driven. So this attempt of the boatman to force Alf only aroused all the dogged stubbornness of his race. The same qualities were in him that are in men who lead forlorn hopes. And there, under the stars, on the lonely pier, encircled by the jostling and shouldering gang, he resolved that he would die rather than submit to the indignity of being robbed of a single stitch of clothing. Not value, but principle was at stake. Then somebody thrust roughly against him from behind. He whirled about with flashing eyes, and the circle involuntarily gave ground. But the crowd was growing more boisterous. Each and every article of clothing he had was demanded by one or another, and these demands were shouted simultaneously at the tops of very healthy lungs. Alf had long since ceased saying anything, but he knew that the situation was getting dangerous and that the only thing left to him was to get away. His face was set doggedly, his eyes glinted like points of steel, and his body was firmly and confidently poised. The air of determination sufficiently impressed the boatmen to make them give way before him when he started to walk toward the shore end of the pier. But they trooped along beside him and behind him, shouting and laughing more noisily than ever. One of the youngsters, about Alf's size and build, impudently snatched his cap from his head. But before he could put it on his own head, Alf struck out from the shoulder and sent the fellow rolling on the stones. The cap flew out of his hand and disappeared among the many legs. Alf did some quick thinking. His sailor pride would not permit him to leave the cap in their hands. He followed it in the direction it had sped and soon found it under the bare foot of a stalwart fellow who kept his weight stolidly upon it. Alf tried to get the cap out by a sudden jerk, but failed. He shoved against the man's leg, but the man only grunted. It was challenge direct, and Alf accepted it. Like a flash, one leg was behind the man, and Alf had thrust strongly with his shoulder against the fellow's chest. Nothing could save the man from the fierce vigorousness of the trick, and he was hurled over and backward. Next, the cap was on Alf's head, and his fists were up before him. Then he whirled about to prevent attack from behind, and all those in that quarter fled precipitately. This was what he wanted. None remained between him and the shore end. The pier was narrow. Facing them and threatening with his fist those who attempted to pass him on either side, he continued his retreat. It was exciting work, walking backward and at the same time checking that surging mass of men. Where the pier joins the shore was the station of the harbor police, and Alf backed into the electric lighted office very much to the amusement of the dapper lieutenant in charge. The sampan men, grown quiet and orderly, clustered like flies by the open door, through which they could see and hear what passed. Alf explained his difficulty in few words and demanded, as the privilege of a stranger in a strange land, that the lieutenant put him aboard in the police boat. The lieutenant, in turn, who knew all the rules and regulations by heart, explained that the harbor police were not ferrymen and that the police boats had other functions to perform than that of transporting belated and penniless sailormen to their ships. He also said he knew that the sampan men to be natural-born robbers, but that so long as they robbed within the law, he was powerless. It was their right to collect fares in advance. And who was he to command them to take a passenger and collect fare at the journey's end? Alf acknowledged the justice of his remarks, but suggested that while he could not command, he might persuade. The lieutenant was willing to oblige and went to the door, from where he delivered a speech to the crowd. But they too knew their rights, and when the officer finished, shouted in chorus their abominable 10 sen, you pay now, you pay now. You see, I can do nothing, said the lieutenant, who, by the way, spoke perfect English. But I have warned them not to harm or molest you, so you will be safe at least. The night is warm and half over. Lie down somewhere and go to sleep. I would permit you to sleep here in the office, were it not against the rules and regulations. Alf thanked him for his kindness and courtesy, but the sampan man had aroused all his pride and doggedness, and the problem could not be solved that way. To sleep out the night on the stones was an acknowledgement of defeat. The sampan men refused to take me out? The lieutenant nodded. And you refused to take me out? Again, the lieutenant nodded. Well, then, it's not in the rules and regulations that you can prevent my taking myself out. The lieutenant was perplexed. There is no boat, he said. That's not the question, Alf proclaimed hotly. If I take myself out, everybody's satisfied and no harm done. Yes, what you say is true, persisted the puzzled lieutenant, but you cannot take yourself out. You just watch me, was the retort. Down went Alf's cap on the office floor. Right and left, he kicked off his low-cut shoes. Trousers and shirt followed. Remember, he said in ringing tones, I, as a citizen of the United States, shall hold you, the city of Yokohama, and the government of Japan responsible for those clothes. Good night. He plunged through the doorway, scattering the astounded boatmen to either side, and ran out on the pier. But they quickly recovered and ran after him, shouting with glee at the new phase the situation had taken on. It was a night long remembered among the waterfolk of Yokohama town. Straight to the end, Alf ran, and without a pause, dived off cleanly and neatly into the water. He struck out with a lusty single overhand stroke till curiosity prompted him to halt for a moment. Out of the darkness, from where the pier should be, voices were calling to him. He turned on his back, floated, and listened. All right, he could distinguish from the babble. No pay now. Pay by and by. Come back now. Pay by and by. No, thank you, he called. No pay at all. Good night. Then he faced about in order to locate the Annie mine. She was fully a mile away, and in the darkness, it was no easy task to get her bearings. First, he settled upon a blaze of lights, which he knew nothing but a man of war could make. That must be the United States warship Lancaster. Somewhere to the left and beyond should be the Annie mine. But to the left, he made out 3 lights close together. That could not be the schooner. For the moment, he was confused. He rolled over on his back and shut his eyes, striving to construct a mental picture of the harbor as he had seen it in the daytime. With a snort of satisfaction, he rolled back again. The 3 lights evidently belonged to the big English tramp steamer. Therefore, the schooner must lie somewhere between the 3 lights and the Lancaster. He gazed long and steadily, and there, very dim and low, but at the point he expected, burned a single light, the anchor light of the Annie mine. And it was a fine swim under the starshine. The air was as warm as the water, and the water as warm as tepid milk. The good salt taste of it was in his mouth, the tingling of it along his limbs, and the steady beat of his heart, heavy and strong, made him glad for living. But beyond being glorious, the swim was uneventful. On the right hand, he passed the many-lighted Lancaster. On the left hand, the English tramp. And ere long, the Annie mine loomed large above him. He grasped the hanging rope ladder and drew himself noiselessly on deck. There was no one in sight. He saw a light in the galley and knew that the captain's son, who kept the lonely anchor watch, was making coffee. Excuse me. Alf went forward to the forecastle. The men were snoring in their bunks, and in that confined space, the heat seemed to him insufferable. So he put on a thin cotton shirt and a pair of dungaree trousers, tucked blanket and pillow under his arm, and went up on deck and out on the forecastle head. Hardly had he begun to doze when he was roused by a boat coming alongside and hailing the anchor watch. It was the police boat, and to Alf, it was given to enjoy the excited conversation that ensued. Yes, the captain's son recognized the clothes. They belonged to Alf Davis, one of the seamen. What had happened? No, Alf Davis had not come aboard. He was ashore. He was not ashore? Then he must be drowned. Here, both the lieutenant and the captain's son talked at the same time, and Alf could make out nothing. Then he heard them come forward and rouse out the crew. The crew grumbled sleepily and said that Alf Davis was not in the forecastle, whereupon the captain's son waxed indignant at the Yokohama police and their ways, and the lieutenant quoted rules and regulations in despairing accents. Alf rose up from the forecastle head and extended his hand, saying, "I guess I'll take those clothes. Thank you for bringing them aboard so promptly." "I don't see why he couldn't have brought you aboard inside of them," said the captain's son. And the police lieutenant said nothing, though he turned the clothes over somewhat sheepishly to their rightful owner. The next day, when Alf started to go ashore, he found himself surrounded by shouting and gesticulating, though very respectful sampan men, all extraordinarily anxious to have him for a passenger. Nor did the one he selected say, "You pay now," when he entered the boat. When Alf prepared to step out onto the pier, he offered the man the customary 10 sen. But the man drew himself up and shook his head. "You all right," he said. "You no pay. You never no pay. You bully boy and all right." And for the rest of the Annie Mine's stay in the port, the sampan men refused money at Alf Davis's hand. Out of admiration for his pluck and independence, they had given him the freedom of the harbor.
That was a nice story.
Huh?
That was a nice story.
I enjoy this story. Okay, so let's talk about it. I really like it because it's very short and it's pretty easy to see what the parts of the story are. If you get used to analyzing short stories like this one, before long, you'll find that you can analyze any story length. Sometimes you have to do a lot of thinking about it, but this is a pretty easy one. So before we look at the nice story chart that I made out for you, don't look at it. We're going to talk about it, okay? First of all, what is the setting of the story? When we talk about setting, we're talking about where, when, some details of place and time, any little details you can remember. Remember, in the setting, in the exposition of the story, we meet the characters, we find out what the setting is. The author has actually opened the world to his story, opened the door to his story world. And so he gives us some information here in the beginning, so we sort of get an idea of where we are and what's going on. Every story world is different. And your job when you first start to read a story or a novel or watch a movie is to figure out what this story world is. Okay? So what would you say about this setting here? Tell me some details that you can remember.
Yokohama, Japan.
Exactly. And I actually looked Yokohama up, and what I found out is that it's about 18 miles from Tokyo, which back in those days, there might have been some unused land in between Yokohama and Tokyo, but I'm sure now it's all just one long piece of development, right? Has anybody in here ever been to Japan? Sometimes military families get sent to Japan. I never did, but okay. So what time of year was it? Did you pick up on that?
July.
Yes.
Summer.
And what's the temperature like?
Warm.
Really hot. It said sweltering heat, actually, and that's why the boatmen weren't wearing very much clothing. They probably had on like one of those little wrap things that boatmen will wear all over the world, you know. You're 25% Japanese? Trey? Awesome. Okay. Okay, so let's see another. Oh, yeah. When do you think this happened? There are some clues that we know this is not present day. When do you think might be a good guess? And what were some of the clues about this was in the olden days at some point? What about the way things? Yeah, exactly. So a sen is like their smallest, I think, coin. It would be like our penny, right? What about Alf's clothes? He was really incensed that the boatman wanted to trade his shirt for a ride. The ride cost 10 cents, which was about 6 American cents, as he said, and his shirt had cost
$2.
$2 whole dollars. So what does this make you think about the time period? Yeah, Cooper.
Probably after World War II.
I think it's probably a lot earlier than that because Alf, Jack London actually was born, I think at the end of the 1800s. It might have been the early 1900s. And this story, I think, oh, no. He was born in the 1800s because he had his first story published in 1893. So this might be the early 1900s. Or it might be the end of the 1800s because he probably wrote it like at the times that he was living. Because remember, he went to sea and himself, and he actually experienced some of these things. Okay. Anyway, it's definitely a long time ago, whatever the exact date is, right? Okay.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, what about the characters? Who's the main character? What do we call the main character?
The
Alf.
protagonist.
The protagonist. And who is it?
Jack London.
Alf.
Alf. Alf Davis, right? Tell me about Alf. Where's Alf from? He's not from Japan. Where is he from? We
United
kept hearing it over and
States.
over. He's from the United States. How old is he?
16.
16. Yeah. How would you describe Alf? Give me some personality characteristics.
Persuasive.
Bold, persuasive. He didn't really succeed. Catalina. Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Uh-huh.
He's kind of proud in a way.
I would say that is his most prominent characteristic. We kept hearing about his pride, right? And do you all know what doggedness means? What does it mean, Trey? You're nodding your head.
Like laziness.
No. It means stubborn. Do you think that's a good description of Alf? Yeah. So pride, stubbornness. Somebody said boldness. Who said that? Somebody said persuasive. Okay. Now, Alf's the protagonist. Let's talk about his problem first, and then we can see who opposes him. What is Alf's problem? Cooper.
It is to get back to his ship.
Yes, he needs to get back to his ship. Lots of times people say he doesn't have any money. That's true, but that's what caused his problem. It's not the actual problem, because if they had taken him without the money, then it wouldn't have been a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So his problem is that he needs to get back to the ship, okay? And all of that stuff that goes on before he says that, let's look at the story. Look back at the story, and I want you to pick up a pen or a pencil or something and circle this on page 168. Let's see, if you look on the second column on page 168, it's the second paragraph of the second column, and it says, he turned on his heel to confront another problem. How was he to get aboard ship? Does everybody see that?
Yes,
Does
ma'am.
everybody see the word problem and how was he to get aboard ship? Jack London was very nice. He even used the word problem for us, so we would know what the problem was, okay? And the problem is what we call what?
The conflict. Climax.
Conflict. So right where you underline this, let's see, where is it? Oh yeah. Underline that like I did. And right where you underline it, next to it, put conflict, okay? It's really important when you read a story that you know what the conflict is, because it helps explain a whole lot about what is actually going on in the story. Now, all of that stuff, before you get to the conflict, the stuff about losing his wallet and the restaurant keeper and all the people that were standing around watching, and all about Alf being a young sailor on board the Annie Mine, before we get to the conflict, all of that stuff is called the what?
Character setting.
Yes, and that special word that starts with the letter E is called
Exposition.
exposition. So all of this stuff up to the conflict line, everything that goes before that is called the exposition. This is where Jack London creates his world for us, and he lets us in so we can figure out what on earth is going on here. He lets us know it's in Japan. He lets us know that Alf is careless. He lets us know that Alf is really prideful and bold, and he would have run away if he could have. He tried to from that restaurant owner, but he was stopped. So all of this stuff before you get to the conflict is exposition. So you can write this in all the way through until you get up to the conflict. Okay? You see how I did that?
Mm-hmm.
Exposition. All of that first column is exposition, and all of that stuff up to the conflict line is exposition. Can y'all see that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So then we get the conflict, and then what happens because of the conflict? What do we call that next part?
The climax.
The climax.
So that comes after this part. What do we call this? It starts with an R, and it's two words.
Rising action.
Rising action. Okay, so where do you think the climax happens? Because between the conflict and the climax, all of that stuff is rising action. So what do you think the climax of the story is, Haley?
I can't write
Why can't you write?
because I sprained my wrist.
Okay, well, Cooper can write it down, and then you can get him to put it in your book, okay, after class. Do you mind doing that, Cooper? Okay. Okay, so, well, Haley, I'll bet you know where the climax is, though. Where do you think Alf's problem is he going to be able to get back to the ship? Where do you think that problem gets solved one way or the other? Any of you that have an opinion about this can answer this.
When he jumps in the water.
Yes. Who said that? Oh, Ryan, you said that? Great, thank you. Yeah, so when he goes flying off the end of that pier, that's the climax. So if you look on page 170, on the second column, it says he plunged through the doorway. This is where the climax starts. Climax starts. Okay? So on page 170, the climax starts here. Where did I write that? Right here. Okay? Climax starts. All right? When he goes running out the door and dives off into the pier, off of the pier into the water, that's where the climax starts, okay? And then the denouement is when the problem has been settled, and it's where it's kind of like what happens after the problem has been settled. And this can be a little tricky. I would say that the denouement starts on page 171 where it says, but beyond being glorious, the swim was uneventful. I kind of expected, as a mom who was horrified by the thought of my darling boys going diving into a dark ocean without even really knowing where they were going, I kind of expected a little more problems to happen. Did anybody else?
No.
No? I mean, he could have drowned. He could have gotten so worn out. You know, it's a long way to swim a mile. Has anybody in here swum a mile before? No? Okay. A mile is a long way, and in the ocean and in the dark, it's really hard. All right. So he could have drowned, or some horrid sea creature could have gotten him. Right?
Yes.
But they didn't. Okay. So I expected a little more pushback. So I think the denouement starts with, but beyond being glorious, the swim was uneventful. So I think that starts here on page 171. Let's see there. Denouement.
Okay.
Okay. And where do you think the conclusion is? Now, the conclusion where everything's kind of wrapped up and the author brings us in for a nice smooth landing and tells us what happened. Either things go back to normal or things have changed in some way. Where do things either go back to normal or they have changed in some way in the end of this story? Catalina.
Changes at the end, like since they treat him differently later.
They do. Remember, they're not going to have them pay anymore. No, I love that. This guy says, you all right. Let's see, you no pay. You never no pay. You bully boy, and you all right. So I really think that conclusion starts there with the next day when Alf started to go to shore. I think that's where the conclusion starts. Because there it's very clear. Something actually has changed. Okay? They could have gone back to normal. They told him he didn't have to pay if they took him back to his ship because they were so amazed at what he did. But they could have the next day, they could have gotten up and gone, that guy's a brat. He's going to pay, all right. He's going to pay twice as much. They could have, but they didn't. It changed. And they said, you never no pay. And then it ends with, because out of respect for Alf Davis's pluck and independence, they had given him the freedom of the harbor. Okay? All right, now let's ask this question. Who is the antagonist in this story? Who opposes Alf? Alf's goal is to get back to his ship. That's his problem. Who isn't helpful in this regard? Cooper.
The people on the shore.
And those men are called
The sampan.
Yes. Let me show you a boat. They still use sampans over in Japan. Hold on a minute. I'll show you what this is so you can see it. This story, it really is what we would think of as a time capsule story. We find out a lot about the way things were in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Sometimes, is there anybody, this is what they look like. And of course, they have different sizes. Some of them are fancier and bigger or smaller. Let's see, I want to close this thing. It's in the way. Close dock. Yeah, so y'all have probably seen it. I'm thinking that if anybody ever read the story about Ping, the little duck in China, they have these in China too. I don't know if they're called the same things.
Yeah.
But it's good to know when you read a story, it's good to find out about the author. It's good to find out about the setting, look up pictures, look up maps, try to get yourself oriented so you can get the full effect of what is going on in the story. Okay. Now, sometimes this sounds strange to our ears as, 21st century Americans. What's strange about it? We don't talk this way anymore. And sometimes people would actually get offended about a story like this and say that people shouldn't read it. Why do you think that might be? Did anything jump out at any of you? Alf thought of them as he thought they had puzzling minds. Remember? And Jack London wrote the short-legged people. Now he did speak kind of rudely about the boatmen, but it was really like the boatmen of every race are turbulent and something. I can't remember what his other word was. So sometimes when we read stories like this, people will say, well, that wasn't very nice. Okay. But what this is a time capsule story. Jack London is writing from his own perspective at the time. And this is what authors do. Okay. They can't write. He couldn't write in the 1800s from our perspective in the 2023. Does that make sense? We're separated by more than 100 years. Things have changed. Also at this time, the only people that got to do the kind of thing that Alf does in this story were sailors. Americans didn't know a lot about what they called the Orient. Okay, we now call it Asia. All right. So everything to them was strange. There's a big culture gap between that part of the world and between Alf's part of the world. Okay. And so when you read a book that was written at a different time period and you find yourself being kind of shocked sometimes about the things people thought and said and did, you do have to keep in mind that that's the way the thinking was. That was what we call the world view at the time. Okay. So there was one of the themes of this is clash of cultures. Alf didn't understand why they were making such a big deal over 25 cents. And they didn't understand why he was so irresponsible and cocky. Why he thought that they ought to do what he told them to do. So there's this big clash, cultural clash between Alf and the sampan men. Okay. So the sampan men are the antagonist. I think the lieutenant is hilarious. He is very dapper. Do you know what the word dapper means? Dapper means very polished, well-spoken, gentlemanly. Okay.
Starla,
Really
I keep trying to
opposite.
not laugh when you laugh.
What?
I keep trying to not laugh and you keep making me laugh.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to enjoy stories.
I know I'm a very smiley person.
The lieutenant probably spoke way better English than Alf Davis did. Okay.
Mhm.
He was much more refined than Alf Davis was. All right. And so look at the, I didn't write this theme, but I need to put it in here. I thought I'd gone back and changed this. Look on page 172. And this is the story chart that we really just talked ourselves through just now. 172. Thank you. Thank you, Trey. Under themes there in that circle in the middle where it says resourcefulness, pride, and survival, which is, you know, you have to say one thing for Alf Davis. He's cocky, he's proud, he's conniving, he's careless, but he is resourceful. He's always trying to problem solve, right? That may be his greatest strength. So under themes, though, I want you to write clash of cultures. Right there in that box, clash of cultures, because that is a theme here. Does everybody see where I'm talking about? Okay, we're on 172, and we have this little circle here. So underneath themes, write clash of cultures, all right? Now we're going to fill out the
Keyword out.
keyword outline on page 173. Okay. So I'm going to plug my little board in here, and I want you to get something to write with. I do suggest a pencil, but you can use a pen if you want to. You're going to need to write it in your book now, and then you're going to need to print it off and write it in pen from one on the ThinkWave, okay? Because you're going to have to turn in the keyword outline. And I know it's going to be the same one I gave you, but you still got to turn it in, okay?
Okay.
All right. So after class, you can print a new one and transfer this, okay? I think I actually say on your assignment sheet that you're supposed to make out the keyword outline, but I just decided that we just all need to do this together, okay? It'll be much, much easier. Let's see, where is, oh, there it is. Okay. All right. Now I hope I'm not going to have any trouble with this today. Okay, so let's talk through this and let's get this down really quick because we have to talk about the vocabulary first and look at an example. Okay. We're doing the first body paragraph. We're going to be doing all 3 body paragraphs this next 2 weeks, okay? And let me open my pen here. Hide floating meeting controls. Okay. Ink tools. Tools. And okay. There we go. All right. So first of all, we want to talk about, in the first body paragraph, it's the exposition. And what is the exposition again?
Characters and setting.
Exactly. Okay, so first of all, what is the setting? And here we need to put, you could list these things in different orders, but I just want you to go ahead and write what I write, okay? Yokohama, Japan, Yeddo Bay. This is going to save y'all so much time
Yes.
when you're writing your paper, okay?
Very nice teacher.
Describe it, where, when, mood, weather. Okay, so Yokohama is, I looked this up, it's about 18 miles from, and all the same rules apply to keyword outlines for stories as for any other kind of writing we've been doing this year. Okay? Tokyo. And I think this is probably early 1900s, I think probably. Okay?
Cool.
And then, you know, I'm describing some more here. So I'm going to put July. It's in the evening. And I'm going to put hot. Now, let's list a couple of things here about Alf's personality. Okay, Alf, hold on just a minute. Alf Davis. And who was Alf? What was he? 16-year-old what?
Boy.
Mm-hmm. And what in particular was he doing in Japan? 16-year-old U.S. sailor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Tell me about him. Just give me a few characteristics. You told one thing, Catalina. What was it?
I'd
Pride. Okay. Somebody else give us another characteristic.
Careless. He was careless.
Careless. Another one?
Like you said, resourceful.
Resourceful. Good listening, John Shaw. And can we do one more? I've got them listed over there on the story chart.
Plucky.
Plucky. I like that. Who said that?
Me.
Oh, good
Ross.
job. Good job. Plucky. Okay. Let's see. Let's tell some things about what the situation was. So, no wallet. I decided in this keyword outline, I'm going to use the not symbol for no. No wallet. No money. No pay. For dinner. You think that does it?
Yes. It does.
Okay. Okay, now it says give detail. Let's see, other characters. Now we don't want to talk about the sampan men or the police lieutenant yet because they're not in the exposition. Remember, this is the exposition, okay? So who is in the exposition though, as far as other characters?
Owner.
Yeah, restaurant owner. Restaurant owner. And what kind of mood is he in?
Foul mood.
Yeah, he's, simple word.
Grumpy.
Yeah, grumpy, mad. And he's also very demanding, isn't he?
Yes.
You know, I don't blame him. He's probably been cheated out of his payment before. That's probably why he's so particular, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then there's just some random people. We'll just call them the crowd, right? Crowd. And how is Alf feeling at this point?
Embarrassed.
Yeah, definitely embarrassed. He's actually embarrassed. It takes a lot to embarrass somebody like Alf Davis, but he actually is embarrassed at this point. And so then he finally finds some money. Where did he find his money?
In his pockets.
Yeah, he found a few coins, stray coins here and there. Okay, so that's a dollar sign. Does that show up okay?
Yes.
Finds money. Okay. And so then the rest, we're coming to the end of the exposition. The restaurant owner bows and Alf is relieved. Okay, does that pretty much sum up what we know about the exposition?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that part?
No.
Okay, well, let's go on to plot stage 2, the conflict and the rising action. And always remember that the conflict causes the rising action. You can never have the rising action first, followed by the conflict. It causes it. Okay, so what is the conflict? What does Alf realize?
He needs to get back to the boat.
Right. So he realizes no money. So he, I didn't mean to do that. So he can't return to his ship, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's his problem. So now we want to see, okay, what does he do in order to try to get around to solve this problem? First, he tries to, do y'all know what the word bluff means? You know, kind of trick them out. Tries to bluff the sampan man, right? He tries to bluff him. He said, yeah, take me back to the ship. And he slowly uses up his options there. Okay. The sampan man says, you pay what? What did he keep saying?
Now.
You pay now. 10, let's see, we've only used 3 words, 10 sen. Okay. All right. So then Alf tries to bargain with him, right? Alf tries bargaining. Sampan. What does the sampan man say? No.
You pay.
Huh? That should say sampan. Can y'all read that?
Yes.
Okay. So then the sampan man thinks of something else he would be happy to take as payment. What would that be?
His
Sampan, give shirt, right? Give shirt. And what does Alf say?
No.
No. Okay. And then the crowd starts doing it. Crowd demands, oh, I wish this little pen wasn't so fidgety. Demands clothes. And what does Alf say?
No.
No. Okay. Okay, now we run into the police lieutenant. Okay. So police lieutenant, LT period is an abbreviation for lieutenant. No police boat. Right? Okay. And so then I'm going to put PLT for police lieutenant now, right? Just to sort of shorten this. Police lieutenant request sampan. What did he ask the sampan men if they would do? Remember, he asked them to take Alf to his boat? And what did they say? Y'all listening?
You pay now.
Yeah, they said, no, you pay now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so then the police lieutenant explains to Alf that they aren't going to, and he says, sleep. Where did he tell him he could go to sleep? Oops, well, goodness, so annoying. Sleep outside, right? Sleep outside. And then he mentioned rules. This is a very important part of the story. rules and regulations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So now we get down, y'all, we're running a little late. If you have to go, then you can, but I'd rather you not if you don't have to. And I am going to put this, I'm going to fill this out and put it up. So why don't y'all just, you can stop writing and let's just talk through this really quick, okay?
Okay.
So Alf refuses to sleep outside. Alf refuses. Well, let me just talk through this because I got to show you something else. And I am going to put this up on the ThinkWave so you can print it up and copy it onto a form, okay?
Okay.
The lieutenant is confused because Alf says he's going to take himself out. Alf says, just watch. And he strips and runs down the pier and jumps into the water. And at that point, the boatmen are they just think it's hilarious. And they start laughing and cheering. And then they offer to take him. And Alf says, no, thanks. And then, so he finally gets to his ship. He sleeps on the deck. The police lieutenant arrives and with the clothes, and they decide he must have drowned. And then Alf comes up and says, thanks for bringing my clothes aboard so promptly. And then after that, the sampan men give him rides for free. Okay. And I will put this up so that you can print it off. Okay. Now let's look at,
So you're going to put it on ThinkWave?
Yes, I'm going to put it on number 10 on ThinkWave so you can use it. Okay.
Okay.
I think once you go through this once and you copy this on your own page, you may have to read through the story again. Okay.
Okay.
You may have to read through the story again to make sure that you know everything that happened. And it's very short, so it won't hurt for you to read it again. Okay. But, then you will be ready to write your paragraphs using my keyword outline. Now, it doesn't say to print my keyword outline off of ThinkWave because I just thought of this morning. Because this is a tricky assignment, okay? And I want y'all to have what you need so you can understand how you do this, because then when you do your own novel, then you're going to be making your own keyword outline out, okay?
Okay.
Now, what you're going to do is you're going, let's see, move your marker of whatever sort you have from page over to page 215. It does say to use the information on it that we wrote in the class on your keyword outline. And so you'll have that, and you're going to do that for all three instead of having to create your own keyword outline, okay? So I want you to see the vocabulary that you're going to be using. If you look on page, look on page 47. Page 47. Let's see, let me close this out so we can all, I can see everybody. All right. We're going to be writing the parts, body paragraphs, which are paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. I want you to draw, these are the words that you can choose from for your vocabulary. Okay.
Okay.
The rest of the introduction and conclusion words will be for the next time, okay? So
Yeah.
let's look, and there's certain words that you have to use. You'll see them in bold black. You must use the word exposition, the word character, and the word setting. You must use the words conflict and rising action. You must use the words climax, denouement, and conclusion. And then you can use synonyms, okay? But make sure those words get in there. So let me show you an example of how this is done, okay? Let's look at page, let's see, I have an example in here that's very well put together. And literature words, you're going to be using 3 to 5 literature words in each paragraph off of those sheets. Okay, and I have that marked on your composition checklist, 3 to 5 literature vocabulary words marked in bold. No underlines, no italics, just bold words for the literature. Let me find this. I've got so many stories in here. Okay, look at book reviews on page 146. Let's read the one on page 147, and I just, again, draw some brackets here so you know this is the part you're going to be writing, the middle part of your story review, okay? Has anybody in here read My Side of the Mountain before? About the guy who goes off and lives in a tree in the Catskills? It's a great book. Unfortunately, this is a plot spoiler, okay? But you would still
Thanks.
enjoy it. It's a great book. Okay.
Let me go read. Let me suggest this book for you to go read. I'm just going to spoil the plot from.
Okay, let's read the 3 middle paragraphs. Notice the bold black words. This is how you're going to be bolding yours. And you're still going to bold all the other things, but I didn't want them gunking up your this example. I want you to notice these words, okay? All right. Paragraph 2 on page 147. Is everybody with me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In the exposition, the tale opens in New York City. Sam Gribley, who is the main character, decides, you can say main character or you can say protagonist, decides that he is very unhappy living in New York. Finally, after hearing his dad talk about the old Gribley farm in the Catskills Mountain, notice this is all in present tense. He decides to run away from the farm, to the farm. He figures he can live on the farm. Sam gathers his belongings and sets out. When he first leaves, he feels well prepared because he has brought many serviceable treasures, including a pocket knife, a ball of string, some flint and steel, an axe, and about $40 he had saved. Catching rides, he ventures on. Eventually, he reaches the wild and mysterious Catskills, the setting of the story. Arriving at his destination, Sam thanks the driver and the excitement begins. Although he finds the old farm place, he realizes that unfortunately there is nothing there to serve as a home. Okay, this is the conflict rising action paragraph. The conflict, and I want you to do yours just like this. The conflict of the story is introduced when Sam realizes his existence will depend entirely on himself and what nature can provide. Will he be able to survive in the woods? In the rising action, Sam works hard, although he is somewhat fearful. He finds a beautiful tree. Sam burns out the inside of the tree as if it were a cave, which becomes his home. He visits the local library for a book on falcons because he has found a nest. Heading back to the nest, Sam captures a baby falcon. Amazingly, Sam is successful in training Frightful the falcon, who is the supporting character. Really and truly, a falcon is the supporting character, to catch different kinds of prey. They set out day after day collecting food to store for winter. As he realizes how much more is left to do to prepare for the winter, his nervousness about surviving heightens. He continues to labor to prepare his home and himself for the fierceness of the season. He remembers just in time one of the most important things he should do. Frantically, he begins to chop and store wood. Meanwhile, one day he finds a man sleeping in the mountains. At first, Sam thinks he's a bandit being sought by the police, but learns that he is a college professor named Bando, lost in the Catskills. They become friends. Now we're doing the climax denouement and conclusion. In the summer, Sam had worried about winter ahead because he believed it would be dangerous and isolated. The climax is reached when winter begins. The cold winter is as entrancing as the warm summer. Sam is well prepared for the winter. He experiments with different plants to make his food taste better. He also enjoys the jam that Bando made when he visited. Sam realizes that he can indeed survive. Hopefully, in the denouement, he awaits Bando's Christmas arrival, who does not disappoint him. He hears a familiar voice. Yelling, he bolts out the door to greet his father. Sam is ecstatic. After a memorable visit, Bando and his father leave. Winter continues with many more adventures. Spring arrives with a great welcome from Sam. In the conclusion, he is surprised one day with what sounds like a large group of people. He thinks reporters and photographers has arrived, but then he hears his father's familiar call. The story closes as he learns that his father has brought the whole Gribley clan. They plan to move to the Gribley farm to be near him. Sam's solo adventure has unexpectedly ended. Okay, now y'all, use the keyword outline to write. Do not write from my story chart. If
Yes,
I hear
yes.
my words on that story chart coming back to me, I'm going to consider it plagiarism. Okay? You
Okay.
can read the story again. You can read the keyword outline, and then you write from the keyword outline in your own words. Yes, John Shaw.
You mean the one by Jack London?
You can use this. Yes, you're going to be writing about that story using the keyword outline that I gave you. You can read that story as many times as you want to. If you're writing your paragraph and you need to go back and look at it, that's fine. Don't use the wording from the story, and don't use my wording that's on the story chart.
Okay.
You can read through the story chart before you start, but do not write from the story chart. Do not be looking at my story chart while you're writing your paragraphs, but use the keyword outline that I give you, okay?
Okay.
The keyword outline is down in very small numbers of words, so you can put it in your own great way, okay? All right, Cooper.
So I think you probably already said this, but I missed it. So when you finish doing the outline, are you gonna submit it today on ThinkWave?
Yes,
Or-
in fact, I'm going to try to do it during my lunch break and put it up there, okay?
Okay.
So y'all need to take my keyword outline and print a blank form, since you're going to have to turn in your keyword outline, and just copy my keyword outline onto your blank form. I'm trying to train you to think about stories in this way, okay? All right. Any other questions?
No.
I have one
John
question.
Shaw. Mm-hmm.
So for the story, you wrote down like where the climax started and ended and stuff. Could you send a picture of that as well? Because I'm worried that I didn't get all of them right.
Oh, you want the story with the markings that we put on the story text? Okay,
Yeah.
that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I'm worried I might have missed something, or I don't know, just in case.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, me
Well,
too.
I want y'all to start, and really when you're watching a movie, does anybody do this now that we've been talking about this for a while? Has anybody watched a movie and thought about what the conflict is and thought about these story parts? Movies, Trey, you have? Oh, good. Katie, have you?
Yeah.
Okay. I want y'all to start thinking about story parts. You know where the climax is coming in a movie. If it's like an action movie, how do you know where the climax is coming?
Like somebody like shoots.
Did anybody see the new Tom Cruise movie back in the summer about
Oh,
Top Gun?
my dad made me watch it 5 times. So yeah, I've seen it.
So you can tell where the climax is, right? In Top Gun?
Yes,
Top
yes.
Gun Maverick, yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was rocking back and forth in my theater seat, grabbing the edge of the seat and going, I knew where the climax was.
Gotcha.
So
I'm trying
sometimes
to-
action movies are the easiest, and maybe mystery movies are the easiest to tell where the climax is, because you get seriously
Tense.
nervous, right?
Mhm.
But all stories have that. It's just that the tension may not be as noticeable. Okay. Yes, Haley.
You can definitely tell where the climax is in The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And in
That's
Lord of the
funny.
Rings, actually. In fact, I think Lord of the Rings has the most intense climax of any book that I have ever read. If you ever read it, you will understand what I mean. I still get that nervous feeling, even though I know how it ends. Yes, John Shaw.
That's funny because this Sunday, me and my family started watching The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, it's great. But
I've
the
watched
book is even greater. You need to read it too.
this one, part 1, and I'm like, great, the story just started after an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah, that has a very long exposition. Very long. Yes, Haley?
My family has watched it like 100 times.
Yeah. Sometimes we'll just put it on and watch a little bit of it. Just watch a little bit of it, you know? It's great. Yeah, it has to have a really long exposition because the book itself is so long. It wouldn't do to have a 2-paragraph exposition for a book that length, right?
No.
Trey?
I have a really great book series that I've read like all of that like came out pretty recently. It's called Explorer Academy, and it's basically like these kids trying to figure out like secrets about someone's dead mother, and at the same time this company is trying to kill the mother's son. So it has you like on the edge of your seat like the entire time, and like every time there's the end of a book, it's like a huge cliffhanger. There's like 10 different climaxes.
That sounds like a Disney princess movie.
Disney princess. Okay. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, like Little Mermaid. So you're really enjoying those. That's good. So start thinking about this when you're reading. What's the problem? Where does it get solved? Try to figure out what the story world is, the setting and characters. It's really fun. Analyzing stories is actually fun. Yeah.
No.
Okay. I disagree with you, John Shaw, and I think you like it too. I just think you don't want to admit it. Okay. You were thinking that it was fun, Cooper?
I was thinking of that sounded kind of like Harry Potter.
Yeah, like Voldemort killed his mom, and then they came after him.
Yeah, she had really good conflicts and climaxes. We only ever read the first book, but I understand that she really does. So, okay. So, anybody have any more questions before we go? This is not easy, you guys, but I'm trying to make it easier with the keyword outline. And please, please, please read over those body paragraphs in those two examples. We only read one, but there are actually two. There's one on the page beside that one. And notice how I get those, or the students did actually get that literature vocabulary in there.
Okay.
Read the directions carefully. This is not easy, but I think you all can do fine with it. Okay.
Okay.
When you turn in your papers next time, you're just going to be turning in those 3 body paragraphs, and we're going to be going over them. I will, and make sure you've got all the things you're supposed to have. So if there's any confusion or anything, you'll have a chance to fix that. But do not take comfort in that, because if you don't do a good job and turn it in like it's supposed to be turned in, you would get a 0 for that. Okay. I'm going to help you with it, and then you'll have a chance to work on it if there's anything that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Okay. So don't think, she's not going to give us a grade. Yeah, I am going to give you a grade. So do a good job, just like this was going to be the final form. Okay. Yes, Haley.
You're going to love my paragraph that we just did.
Good. I can't wait to read it. I expect I'm going to have a good time again. So, okay, y'all. Let me know if you have any questions or problems. You probably will. So let me know, okay?
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. It was fun.
Bye.
See you next time.
See you tomorrow, Miss Kimbrell.
Oh, yeah. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.